You know, I have a confession to make. I don't replay any of the games I review. I don't think any of them are bad, except Banjo-Kazooie, but whenever I beat them, they feel like a once-in-a-lifetime event that makes me ponder about the enjoyment I had playing them. There's a certain magic I feel that's lost after beating a game for the first time, or for review purposes, that makes me feel like not replaying it. There's also the fact that I'm busy with other games on my consoles, but one such game I always found myself coming back to is my most replayed game of 2020, having played it a total of 5 times. A game that I think will never be replicated today, my first full introduction to a series you might have heard of, Oddworld Stranger's Wrath. Oddworld Stranger's Wrath is a third-person, first-person hybrid action-adventure game published by EA, now Just Add Water, and was developed by Oddworld Inhabitants, the developers responsible for the Oddworld series by, as Caddy puts it,
the legendary Limitless Luscious Law Landing.
Let it be known, I'm not a big fan of Oddworld. I found out about it thanks to Categories and was able to get into it thanks to Stranger's Wrath, and I have tried out Abe's Odyssey and Much's Odyssey, both of which I stopped playing because of their awkward controls. Abe's Exodus is the only game I never played because it looks more like an expansion of Abe's Odyssey rather than a full-on sequel, fitting since it was made as a side game. Ever since I picked up this game at a Bookman's last year, Stranger's Wrath has reached its peak as one of my favorite games of all time because of its tight gameplay, little secrets that I have been looking on various playthroughs, and sweet blend of first-person and third-person gameplay that I don't think can be replicated today. So today, at the dawn of a new, hopefully better year, I want to talk about my most replayed game of 2020, and so far, my favorite game in the Oddworld series and one of my new favorite games of all time. Before I begin, I just want to say thank you all for 100 subscribers on this channel. It's a small number but a huge victory, so if you enjoy my content, feel free to subscribe and hit that bell icon to be notified of when I upload new content. I also want to mention that since I'm not a huge Oddworld fan and only truly got into it thanks to this game, consider this all coming from a non-fan's perspective, and I will be looking at the HD remaster of Stranger's Wrath on PC. With that out of the way, let's just get into it. This is Oddworld Stranger's Wrath. So the game opens up with words on a grave and a mysterious cowboy kidnapping critters and setting them up as traps. We then see the cowboy traversing a graveyard, and we then see little people in a village getting whatever fish they can get, only to be interrupted by 2 cowboys in a chase. Then one cowboy gets the hand on this cowboy and manages to capture him. This is where we meet our protagonist. Not Abe or Munch, but the titular Stranger. A rootin' tootin' critter lootin' crossbow shootin' bounty hunter. In his quest for booty. Blister's booty. As in, this guy. The stranger bags up Blister, says a little one-liner, heads back to town and bags him up in jail, and then continues his duties. As we collect more bounties, we learn why the stranger is doing this. He needs 20 grand in order to get a surgery done on him by a doctor Viker in order for him to survive. So with all that set in stone, now it's up to the stranger to get 20 grand and get that surgery, all while bringing in outlaws dead or alive. While I'm not a major fan of Western media, I could probably say that the story of this game, at least in the first several hours, is the usual Western bounty hunter setup plot. But the twist here is that the stranger is bounty hunting for a reason, and the story takes a drastic turn towards the end and tells a different story altogether. The story may not be strange, but what of the presentation? Before I go over the presentation, I should go over the game's place in the Oddworld universe. Whenever you think of Oddworld, you think of this, right? I want to stress that I love these designs, especially the stranger himself, who looks like what would happen if Clint Eastwood discovered furfinny.net. But other than the Viker Doctor, the Fuzzles, and the Slogs, both from Munch's Odyssey and Abe's Exodus respectively, every other character in this game looks so not Oddworld, and majority of them almost give off sort of a Rayman vibe. I love this, and that I feel is what makes them work. They are odd and look like nothing you have ever seen before. It's also a great way to expand the Oddworld universe with new creatures and locations that also look out of Oddworld. Oddworld Stranger's Wrath graphically looks great. Even without the HD version, it might be one of the best looking games on the Xbox. Given that this is a Western game, they really nailed the industrial cowboy prospector aesthetic of these levels pretty well. Now, given that I'm playing the HD remaster, I of course have to say that this game has a couple of differences than the original. Looking at the Xbox version, while it still looks good today, the models looking at them today all look like preloaded models in Fortnite, whereas in the HD remaster, they all look stellar, almost like how they look in the cutscenes, and boy oh boy do I love these cutscenes. There's just something about them, from the actual animations to the use of 3D characters in front of 2D backgrounds, that makes them look on par with an animated theatrical movie. A problem I have with the HD version regarding the graphics is the stranger's shirt. The stranger's shirt under his poncho in the game is orange, but in later cutscenes his shirt is green, just like how he looked in the Xbox version. I just thought I'd like to point that out because it always bugged me. There was also a change to the HUD for the bounty store. In the original, the HUD looked futuristic, whereas in the remaster, they made it look like a wanted poster, which is actually a pretty cool touch. Some of my favorite levels visually include Mongo Gulch, the Native Temple, Buzzerton, the Sewers, Mongo Valley, the Overgrown Facility, and the Grub Cave. I want to go over the writing in this game. I'm not kidding when I say this, but Oddworld Stranger's Wrath is one of the most quotable games I have ever played. I always found myself quoting various lines from the Outlaws like,
"Hey, come on, Tony! Let's take him down!"
and this line from the Wolvarks.
"Hey, eat my crusty underwear, boy!"
That one especially is my absolute favorite. Whoever wrote that line is a fucking genius. Probably Lanning himself. The animation is also great. The cutscenes of course steal the show, but my favorite in the game is the stranger sprinting animation. Another thing I like about the animation is that whenever you die, the enemy will come up to you and stomp you into the ground. It's so humiliating that it's actually kinda incredible. I also want to mention that one thing I like about Stranger's Wrath is the fact that the townspeople have conversations when you're in towns. It makes the world of Oddworld feel lived in and truly immerses the player into the world of Oddworld. The music is also amazing. I always bash on atmospheric music for being unmemorable, but the soundtrack in Stranger's Wrath easily takes the cake. It was all composed by Michael Bross, who worked on other games like Firefall, Dragon Sphere, a handful of Ratchet & Clank games, Return of the Phantom, and Oddworld Munchausen, as well as Abe's Odyssey, New and Tasty. The music is primarily composed of futuristic spaghetti western music, and it is the best western music I have ever heard in any western media. I love the echoing noises, the futuristic beats, and the overall western bits they put into these tracks. Some of my favorite tracks in the game include the theme of Filthy Hands Floyd, Windy Town, Remote Town, Another Day, Another Fight, and my favorite track in the game, Burning Town. So the music is amazing, and so is the voice acting. Lorne Lanning voices a ton of characters in the Oddworld series, and he proves his vocal talents here with the Stranger, the Natives, Blister's Booty, the Doctor Viker, and Secto, and he does a good job. My favorite voices out of all of these are the Stranger and Secto.
I hear you're paying out for a Steve head. You're telling me you have a Steve head? Maybe I knows where to find one. For 20 grand. Better be fresh for 20 grand. So when I bag one, where do I find you? Easy. I own the Mongo River. You'll find my office at Secto Springs Dam. I'm always here. Well, that's good to know.
My favorite voice in the game goes to the Outlaws, all voiced by senior level designer Steve Desilets, or Desilets, I don't know. And while it sounds the same for all of them, I can't help but love it a lot.
Boss! Boss, we got company! You better get out of here! What the? Oh shit! I better ride down and guard my loot! Gotcha, boss! Don't let that son of a clacker get down the canyon, you hear me? Don't worry, he's gonna be a pile of ashes in a few minutes.
For the game's difficulty, I was able to play this game on normal because on the Xbox version there are no difficulties, so I recommend playing on normal in the HD version if you want the original Xbox experience. So overall, Oddworld Stranger's Wrath might hit all of the markers for an Oddworld game's presentation. The graphics look good, the music is amazing, and the voice acting is great. The main star of the game isn't expanding the Oddworld universe, it's the gameplay. Oddworld Stranger's Wrath plays as an unlikely mix of two genres, third-person platforming and first-person shooting. All these together makes this one of the most unique games I have ever played, and I feel it can never be replicated today. The third-person platforming is pretty good, but it's not the game's main selling point. You can jump, climb ropes, and if you keep running forward, the stranger will sprint on all fours. It's pretty useful for traversing the world and running away from enemies. The main selling point for me is the combat. Stranger's Wrath allows the player to play like a first-person shooter shooting critters at enemies, or if you're feeling ballsy, you can always go melee on your enemies using two attacks, a spin and a standing headbutt, or you can always charge at your enemies while sprinting. The melee combat is definitely the stuff I use the least in the game. Before I continue, I want to mention that this game comes with the bounty mechanic where you can bag an outlaw to get moolah. If you bag an outlaw dead, you'll get a less satisfying bounty. You can also get moolah by either finding treasure taken by outlaws, destroying barrels, finding green stuff around the world, or by beating the shit out of townsfolk. But be careful, because if you get too rough, the town will start fighting back. One thing I don't like about the moolah in this game is that it's really bouncy, and so it makes it hard to reach on either high platforms or in foliage. The best example of this problem was on my way to New York City. The stranger also can talk to himself just in case you ever wanted to know what to do next, or he can talk to citizens for directions, or even blisters booty when he's in jail. Yeah, I should mention that there are a ton of secret things you can do in Stranger's Wrath. If you bag a few outlaws, you can talk to them in the jail in the first level. It's something I never noticed until my 5th playthrough of the game on Xbox. So keep your eyes out while playing the game, like treasures found throughout the world and the other directions. When playing first person, you don't use bullets. After all, the stranger admits he doesn't like guns.
Never liked guns.
Instead, you use critters found throughout the world, or you can get them through the general store. You can also get the critters in critter boxes. There are a total of 9 critter types in Oddworld Stranger's Wrath. Stunks, Bolomites, Chipmunks, Zapflies, Fuzzles, Thud Slugs, Boombats, and Stingbees. There's also the Sniper Dart Mosquitoes you get later in the game, which you can watch on enemies. Stunks can incapacitate multiple enemies and make them barf. Bolomites can wrap up enemies, which is useful for bringing in outlaws alive. Chipmunks can lure nearby enemies, which also works if you want to trap them. Zapflies are the only infinite ammo in the game. They can zap enemies if fully charged and are also useful for gathering up critters and opening doors. Fuzzles are moderate damage critters that bite around enemies. Thud Slugs are hard-hitting critters that are useful for stunning outlaws. Boombats are really explosive critters. And finally, the Stingbees are rapid-fire critters that fire real fast and have the most ammo count out of any critter in the game. The critters can be upgraded later in the game with special perks such as more damage, 3 wide shots, etc. The Zapfly, however, is the only critter that can't be upgraded. You can also switch around your critters on the fly using the D-pad. As stated earlier, the general store is your optional solution to getting critters if you have the moolah for it, but the general store also sells upgrades such as higher stamina, critter space, critter track potions, damage upgrades, etc. And there's also a black market you can get later in the game, which is kinda pointless because it sells almost the same stuff as the general store. One of the main enemies you will be facing throughout the game are the Outlaws, various creatures from the Oddworld universe that come in 8 units: shooters, cutters, snipers, nailers, mortars, semi-autos, bombers, and flamers. A majority of these outlaws will also hit you if you're up close. Shooters are your average shooting enemies, cutters throw knives at you, snipers do what you think they do, nailers are brute enemies that come up close and hit you, and are immune to most of your ammo except for the heavy hitting ones. Mortars launch rockets at you, semi-autos are powerful versions of the shooter enemies, bombers are kamikaze units that come up and explode, and the flamers are flamethrower enemies. Also in the game you'll find sloggies which come up and bite you, and the slag, which is essentially a bigger version of the slogs. For the game's bosses, there are a total of 14 bosses in the game, a majority of which consists of the notorious outlaws you'll be hunting throughout your adventure. All these outlaws can be brought in either dead or alive, and fun fact, on my 3rd and 4th playthrough of this game on Xbox, I was able to bring in every single wanted outlaw alive. The strategy of bringing in an outlaw usually involves using the Boombats, Zapflies, and Thud Slugs and Stunks, so definitely keep that in mind if you're going into this game. I should also mention that a majority of these outlaws all have shortcuts that take you back to town. The first boss is Filthy Hands Floyd. He's one of the easiest bosses in the game, and all he does is shoot you with his gun. You can easily catch him with a bullet might. Next is the Lootin' Duke. The Duke fights you with a rapid fire weapon, and he, along with the rest of the bosses, can be stunned using your other ammo. I primarily recommend using the Zapfly Stunks and Boom Bats if you want to get him alive. But unless you're unforgiving, then you can grind Duke into mincemeat.
Now that's how Dukes go down.
Third is Boyle's Booty, brother of Blister's Booty. Boyles is one of my favorite bosses in the game, primarily because of the fight being in a town shootout. Anyway, he's surrounded by a bunch of outlaws that you'll have to take out, and he fires a shotgun style weapon. Before I move forward, I should mention that there is a rescue mission to save a clacker named Eugenius. Following him is Joe Mama.
Yo, Mom!
She's one of the hardest bosses in the game, primarily because of her infinitely spawning enemies. But otherwise, all she does is throw knives at you and you can easily cap her.
That's a bagging 'em good.
Then we have Meegly McGraw. Meegly is another one of my favorites, primarily because of his gimmicks, as he starts this fight in two phases. The first has him riding tiny as he tries to hurt you and then shooting a rapid fire weapon. Phase 2 begins where he will start running away and eventually shooting you. After him is Pack Rat Palooka. Palooka is another boss with a gimmick, in this case an energy shield powered by generators that can be shut down with a Zapfly. Otherwise, all he does is fire rockets at you. Then is Flint Explosives McGee. He starts out the fight in a minecart that you gotta bring down. Then when he is down, he'll shoot out his explosive gun with rockets. He's definitely one of the hardest bosses in the game due to the amount of enemies coming out on all sides as he rides his minecart. After is Lefty Lugnuts. He fights you up in his tents with snipers, and he'll occasionally take a break and let his boys do the handiwork. Otherwise, he fires really powerful shots from his gun. You can also hide behind gravestones for cover. Second to last is Elbows Fraley. Definitely one of the easiest bosses in the game, and the only one that is all melee. All you need to do is shoot his open back while he lowers you down from the platforms. Finally, the last outlaw is Fatty McBoom Boom. He will launch rockets at you, and he comes with a crazy wrestling move that involves him launching himself at you. So overall, Oddworld Stranger's Wrath is an excellently fun game that will never be replicated today. It plays really well, and there isn't any flaws I can say about it other than its moolah. Let's settle this the stranger way and go over the finale. So after freeing Eugenius, the stranger learns that the native grubs of Mongo Valley were protected by the mighty Steve, until they went missing, and so the grub's water was taken by a villain called the Octoguy. So after clearing more outlaws about midway through the game, the stranger receives a wanted poster for a Steve head and makes a call for the one handing the reward. This is where we meet our delightfully devilish antagonist, Secto, a ruthless mogul and owner of the Secto Springs Water Company, who owns and runs the Secto Springs Dam. He promises the stranger 20 grand for a Steve head and to find him at his dam. The stranger hangs up and snarls at the poster, a foreshadowing of what's to come. Meanwhile, Secto calls up an outlaw and promises the same price for the stranger, and so the stranger heads out to New York City in Mongo Valley, which just so happens to be the location of the Doc's office. So after bragging in some more outlaws, the stranger goes up to Doc's place, only to find the Doc hanged and the outlaws cornering him. And then they have a shootout and the outlaws take him out. The stranger awakens to find himself tied up in the outlaw hideout. The outlaws interrogate the stranger only for him to drop his operation. The outlaws take a look at it fairly surprised, and it's here that we get our game's main twist. Hiding under those pants, the stranger was a Steve all along. The outlaws attempt to skin him, but then they are caught in an ambush, so the stranger takes down his captors. This next fight has you beating the outlaws in a nearby fire, all while Decasterator over here tries to beat you with his hammer. Beat him into the fire and rinse and repeat. So the stranger escapes and relishes in this twist. He is no longer wanted now that people know he's a Steve. He heads out the next day only to discover that it was the grubs that saved him, and so with their help, the stranger now sets out to take down Secto. This twist is absolutely genius because it perfectly subverts expectations. The outlaw stuff perfectly creates a false sense of security if you were thinking it will be a game about cowboys, and then near the end of the game it completely turns into a Viking war against capitalism. I love this, it's genius. You now wear the armor of your Steve ancestors, and so the game is now centered on taking down Secto. You upgrade your ammo throughout the game, and like I said, these upgrades all range to stronger damage and longer range. Your enemies this time are the Wolvarks, minions of Secto that come in 5 units. Shooters, semi-autos, snipers, grenadiers, and slog handlers. Shooters, semi-autos, and snipers do exactly what you think they do. Grenadiers have shields and they throw bombs at you, and slog handlers call out sloggies to take a bite out of you. Secto also comes with the shock spheres, which are machines that if you get near them, they will shock you with electricity, and the Galactigai, which act as bosses throughout this half of the game. They're definitely my least favorites as they shoot spikes at you, spin up to you, zip around the battlefield, and they could shoot out green slime that you need to escape by moving the analog stick Mario Party style. I should also mention that this game comes with a boat, which is another one of my least favorite things about the game. It controls rather awkwardly, but thankfully it's not in the game for long. So after saving a few grub outposts, the stranger heads out to find Secto, using a boat. Once the stranger makes his way up to Secto's dam, the grubs set up a bomb and the stranger rushes to the belly of the beast. The final boss is a capitalist catastrophe takedown against Secto. This fight is split into two phases. The first has you fighting two Galactigai, which is kind of a nightmare, and the last one has you fighting Secto in a machine that shoots out plasma balls and eventually a big laser. Be sure to hide behind debris when it fires. Otherwise, he's one of those 180 runaround bosses, and the only way to beat him is to destroy those batteries powering his machine. Destroy the batteries and Secto will go down. Secto is the worst boss in the game, and I wish he would continue fighting on the ground with guns and stuff. So after beating Secto, the stranger will hang up his body Tarzan style and claim victory for Mongo Valley. Until the dam breaks, causing the water to break loose and finally giving the grubs back their water. The stranger looks over Secto's body and notices something. A third leg. That's where it's revealed that Secto was also a Steve all along. The old Steve kicks breath and asks,
Is the water free?
To which the stranger replies,
Yeah, all free.
And then he dies. And so, the game ends with the real Secto, a little octopus swimming off into the sunset, along with a quote from Chief Luther Standing Bear of the Sound Nation. The end. Oddworld Stranger's Wrath does not have a 100% completion reward, but if you progress through the game, you can unlock stuff in the extras, including concept art, storyboards, a deleted scene, this thing that doesn't appear in the game, which looks like a cross between a desert rain frog and a murloc, and a progression reel of the game's intro, from storyboards to rough animatics to finished product. Oddworld Stranger's Wrath, ever since I found it at a Bookman's in 2020, has reached the level of being one of my new favorite games of all time in such an impressive short span. With its great visuals, brilliant music, genius plot twist, and overall creatively fun gameplay, I could safely confirm that Oddworld Stranger's Wrath is a brilliant game from the limitless legendary mind of Lorne Lanning. This game is the Star Fox Adventures of Oddworld. Only difference is, I'm pretty sure fans didn't all react to it the same way JonTron did.
Oh my god, it was terrible. Oh no, what the fuck is that?
It honestly kinda sucks that this game isn't canon anymore because it has so much potential for a sequel. After all, Secto is still out there, and who knows what diabolical scheme he's up to. With Oddworld Inhabitants making a new quintology, I hope Lanning makes more side games, or at least a new game inspired by Oddworld Stranger's Wrath, because let it be known that I think Stranger's Wrath can never be replicated today. You need a specific amount of effort and design to make this game work, and work it does indeed. Unless someone makes a game that plays like God of War and Call of Duty, then yeah, I'll take it. But for right now, Oddworld Stranger's Wrath is a game that I will continue to replay on the original Xbox for many moons to come. I'm going to give Oddworld Stranger's Wrath an elusive 9.5 out of 10. Definitely will play again.